The next Karate Kid came out 10 years after the first Karate Kid in 1994, and this time Mr. Miyagi would set out on a new adventure, and the series would move away from focusing on Daniel LaRusso as Mr. Miyagi began to train the next Karate Kid, Julie Pierce, played by Hilary Swank. Now, when it comes to this movie, I remember being a kid and seeing all the commercials for this film. And I remember not really being too interested in the movie because while I knew of the Karate Kid trilogy, even when I was a little kid, I think I was around 10 years old or so when this movie first popped up being promoted, I felt like I looked at it and said, they're just trying to milk a franchise that hasn't meant anything in a while. Even me as a kid knew that it came off like a milk job, and that's exactly what it is. However, I've decided to go back and look at this movie through 2024 lens to see if it's gotten better or to see how I feel about it. And to be honest with you, I now understand that my fears of sort of being apprehensive about seeing this movie and the fact that I stayed away from it for so long was definitely accurate. This movie straight up sucks. I mean, I really went into it with an open mind, and the best thing about this movie is easily Pat Morita as Mr. Miyagi, but even Mr. Miyagi in this movie feels like he's just repeating the same lessons over and over again for a new person. This movie, unlike the first three Karate Kid movies, was not written by Robert Mark Kamen and was not directed by John G. Avildsen. This was written by Mark Lee and directed by Christopher Kane. And even though the producer, Jerry Weintraub, was the same, and even though Bill Conti did the music, and the music for this movie is fun, like it's good, it has really good music, my God, were they missing the creators of the original three movies. Robert Mark Kamen was not involved here, and it really is wild that he was so important to these characters, considering what the Cobra Kai trio have done with these characters and made them way more interesting 30 some odd years later. This movie does the opposite. You go into this film, and first of all, the script is a complete mess. Julie Pierce comes off very unlikable, and even by the time that she ends up becoming more warm to Mr. Miyagi, getting to sort of be his new student, his new adoptive daughter in a way, surrogate daughter, she still doesn't quite earn enough time with me to become likable. She's just not likable throughout the entire movie. Michael Ironside as Colonel Dugan was completely wasted, and he came off like a more boring version of John Kreese. Like, imagine John Kreese, except without the charisma and without that 80s psycho villain fear factor. That was Michael Ironside in this movie. This man slept through a paycheck. Besides that, the other characters, like the other guys in this film, are so damn boring and generic. The script is a complete mess. Unlike the first and even the sequel of the original Karate Kid, those warm moments with Daniel and Mr. Miyagi where you really see them bonding, where you see Mr. Miyagi kind of playing around with Daniel to teach him a lesson. Nowhere in this movie did I feel that. And it's crazy to say that because Hilary Swank would go on to have a tremendous career and even win an Oscar. But truth be told, I'm not going to blame her for this because once again it comes down to the script. The dialogue here is very lazy. There's a really awkward scene early in the film where Julie talks to her grandmother and basically says something to the effect of, both of my parents were killed in an accident. Now, obviously the grandmother knows that because the grandmother's taking care of her. The only reason that the scriptwriters put that line in the movie is to tell the audience, The only reason Mark Lee had her say that line in that moment is so that we, the audience, get sympathy for her. But all it did was take me out of the moment because it wasn't earned. She literally tells her grandmother, who is taking care of her and already knows this, her own backstory that she already knows. It would have actually been more respectful to the audience if she turned towards the camera, winked, pulled a freaking Deadpool or a Zach Morris, and told the viewing audience, my parents died a couple years ago in a car crash. Like, that would have actually been more respectful than what they did there. The villains of this movie are boring. They're nowhere near even the least charismatic member of Cobra Kai in the previous films. The whole, like, finale where you have the bullies against Julie and then eventually Miyagi challenging Dugan. Like, the Miyagi, when it came time for Miyagi to sort of step in and fight, it did not feel earned. It didn't feel, even though Miyagi has only had a handful of fights in the franchise, and the most impactful was probably either the one in Karate Kid Part 1, where he fights off the bullies when they're beating up on Daniel, or in 2, when he fights John Kreese, when John Kreese's knuckles get bloodied. Hell, even the fight in Karate Kid Part 3, which I said was not even that realistic, when they basically did the Terry Silver and John Kreese versus Miyagi fight, even those fights felt more earned than this one. This felt like it was shoehorned into the end of the script just to give Miyagi something to do. It was almost like the writer just said, screw it, this character, Julie's not working. Let's give the people what they want and let Miyagi have a scene of action. And it just felt so empty. Like, this movie ended, and the first thing I said to myself was, well, that sucked. And I came to realize something. I don't think I had ever seen this movie before. I think I may have read up on what happened, or maybe I saw a review on YouTube at some point or another, but it hit me that prior to just a few days ago, I had not seen this movie before. Like, it actually hit me, because I think if I had, I would have already had sour grapes going into watching it again. But man, it was just a mess. And it all builds up to this scene where she goes to the prom. The whole plot here is that she has like a secret bird that she's taking care of. And at one point, and this is so lazy and ridiculous, it's implied that Mr. Miyagi uses magic to heal the bird's wings. Like, there's a couple of times in this film where it's beyond just Mr. Miyagi is the best martial artist ever, like in the previous 3 Karate Kid movies. No, here it was like this man had superhero powers. Like, multiple times in the movie, at least twice, I'm like, wait, this is really stretching it here. This was even less realistic than that school-wide rumble at the end of season 2 of Cobra Kai. The next Karate Kid was completely unnecessary. It sort of felt like those like number 4 movies that didn't need to happen. Like, for example, Insidious, The Last Key, that didn't need to happen. We were happy with just 3 movies. Or The Expendables 4. I feel like once you do a trilogy, and the trilogy is not even loved, just somewhat respected, once you do that trilogy, there's no need to add a 4th entry other than you trying to milk the absolute final droplet that you can out of a franchise, and that is how this felt. This felt like a paycheck movie that failed to pay anybody because it was a flop and it was panned when it first came out, and there's a reason why. Nobody involved in the original trilogy had anything to do with this movie except for Pat Morita and Bill Conti and the producer. The story was already pretty much complete, and so this movie did not need to happen. And when I watched The Karate Kid 3, I said to myself that at least that movie is fun to revisit every few years just to, have fun with it. This movie, I don't know if I ever want to watch this movie again. I felt like I had my time wasted. I felt like even if Julie pops up in Cobra Kai season 6 later on, I'm not even going to care at this point because yes, they can rehab her character in Cobra Kai, and they probably should. And yes, they can make it so that the next Karate Kid has more meaning than it does. But there's no way that they can take it and actually make the next Karate Kid anything more than a below average, crappy movie. They just can't do it. They actually managed, Cobra Kai that is, to make the second and third Karate Kid movies better in retrospect because of the lore that they added to the entire Miyagi verse. Whereas, no matter what they do, they can make Hilary Swank's Julie more likable, but the movie itself is just not a fun time. The jokes don't land except for a couple. It's just not a fun time, and I don't want to watch this movie ever again. I'm sorry, this was not a good film. And really, it shut down the franchise for decades because the next Karate Kid movie we would get after the next Karate Kid would be the 2010 Karate Kid film starring Jackie Chan and Jaden Smith, which was supposed to be a reboot, but now it's been retconned into being part of the Miyagi verse, just like a separate story, like a side story, not involving Mr. Miyagi or Daniel, but it's in the same universe. So I think I will watch that movie next, although I have definitely never seen that movie because I don't like film remakes. And I've said that before many times on this channel. So when I see a remake of an 80s movie, I'm not sure I really want to go see it. And so I did not go see it when it came out in 2010. But maybe now I'll see it because I did hear it's not so bad. The next Karate Kid, though, bad. Not a good movie in any way. Even if you are a Miyagi fan, maybe it's worth seeing it once. Maybe. But there's so much better things to do with your time. Those are my thoughts on the next Karate Kid.